Welcome to the morning when the bells in Wilmington were not a call to prayer, but a command dressed like devotion, a rope pulled twice, then once again, as if the city itself were clearing its throat before it spoke. November air along the Cape Fear hung cool and thin. Wood-framed houses held their breath, and somewhere a woman at a doorway told a child what every doorway learns in time: do not follow the bells. Streetlight halos sank into fog. Boots scraped cobblestone. Paper rustled in a way that sounded almost alive. Ink has a smell sharp metallic, a little like a warning, and on this morning it traveled faster than rumor. A headline tucked inside ash, a masthead ghosting up through smoke. A room where a press once thudded steady as a heart, and beside it, a coat hung on the back of a chair that wouldn't hold anyone else today. The city inhaled, and the bells on their own small throne of timber and iron kept time for men who had decided that time belonged to them. Listen, not for music, but for sequence one ring, another, and the third that doesn't sound like the first two, cracked urgent, the note that shifts a town from argument to action. A church steeple is only wood and wind until a hand pulls the rope, then it becomes a mouth. A courthouse is only brick and doubt until paper inside it learns to speak. The river is only water until it remembers. And today, everything remembers. He stands at the right edge of our frame. The editor with the dark frock coat and high collar. A posture built from long nights over type and long days carrying answers nobody asked for. He is not a symbol, he is a citizen, but history will spend years turning him into whatever it needs. He knows what ink can do, and what it cannot do when a city decides its conscience is a luxury. He tilts his head as the bells shudder the air, counting without thinking, a habit learned in pews and printing rooms. 1, 2, hold, 3. Do not follow the bells. Because some summons are traps with manners. Because the shortest road to a crowd is a sound that everyone recognizes. On Market Street, the fog sits low, the way silence sits low over a room where something has just been said. In a wooden chapel, a hymn begins and stops, not from fear exactly, but because the room forgets its next line. On courthouse paper, the future is being written in the smallest decisions: who enters, who must leave, which names can be spoken aloud without consequence. Doors hinge and unhinge. The city rehearses a scene it swears it's never played before, though every board and every porch knows better. There will be witnesses plenty, and their versions will not match, because truth in a crowd fractures like light through old glass. Some will swear the first smoke rose near the press, others that it rode the collar of a man who didn't look back. Some will say the bells were mercy, a warning to stay away, and others that they were bait away to gather bodies where numbers could do the work of law. And then there are the stories that don't aim to be believed so much as remembered: the sexton, who placed his palm on the rope and felt it breathing; the woman who counted to 13 and told the child to count with her slow, steady like a shield. Before we go any further, before the street narrows and the air thickens and names begin to carry more weight than they were built for, leave your marker in the present. Tell us where you're listening from. Tell us the minute you pressed play. Tell us if the bells you know are church bells, factory whistles, phone alarms in the dark, because this isn't only a story about 1898, it's about the times you have heard a summons that felt like safety and turned out to be something else. The camera moves, not to dramatize, but to witness, gliding from the man at frame's edge to a doorway where a boy hesitates. Knuckles ready to knock courage not yet tested by the sound of men arranging themselves. The light is autumn thin, coming in sideways, laying a blade along the floorboards. A photograph on the wall catches part of it. Faces arranged in the serious geometry of the era, all formality and unsmiling pride eyes that promise to remember, even if paper does not. Wilmington, then, is a study in friction. A black middle class building stores and schools and a public voice. A majority that votes and expects the math to matter. A city that could be a model, which is exactly what makes it a target. The editor has written what he will not apologize for. Others have written what they will not forgive. Power dislikes contradiction. It prefers a single story told loudly enough to drown the rest. The bells help with volume. A match is a small thing, but it can teach a room how to spell silence. Smoke moves like handwriting at first, curling the letters of a language that is bad for lungs and worse for memory. A door opens, someone steps through, and the crowd, in learning itself, becomes plural voices, footfalls, a mutual permission. The rope goes tight, slack tight, the ritual of force with a choir loft soundtrack. Between each pull there is the grace note of doubt, and then the next pull erases it. If you stand at the corner, any corner, and keep your feet still, the city will rotate its story past you. A man in a good coat doing something he will later call unfortunate but necessary. Another man who will never call anything necessary again. A woman who will remember exactly where the smoke touched the hem of her dress. A boy who will grow old telling the true part and the truer part that makes listeners lean in. A bell that will keep its dignity even as its job is changed. The press-heavy patient turns to a shape in ash, and ash to a kind of paper that writes on the wind. There is a moment, small, private, almost polite, when the editor decides whether to speak. Not to the crowd, to himself. A man is his own audience first. He lifts his chin. He is the same person he was yesterday, which is both courage and risk. This is the part of the morning that does not photograph well the weight of discretion, the inventory of options, the arithmetic of living to print another day. Outside, the bells continue their usefulness proven, while inside breath arranges words that may never find a page. We won't rush. We won't sharpen the edges until they bleed. We'll let the scene sit, like chairs still warm from people who rose too fast. The wind carries a thin ribbon of river smell metal leaf distance. A dog barks and gives up. A hymn finds its ending. Someone tries the courthouse door and discovers it opens easier than expected. Somewhere a ledger is being corrected without crossing anything out. The bells keep time, and time benevolent to no one moves. Do not follow the bells, the woman says again, not as fear, but as craft, the old skill of living through. Count instead. 1, 2, 3, and then breathe. When the third rings, we step across the threshold into the version of the day that will make the records, and the version that will live in the mouth of the people who could not write but never forgot. Both are true. Both are incomplete. Both are needed if we are to hear this city clearly. November 1898. Wilmington, North Carolina, a river city where brackish water lifts and lowers the day, where docks breathe out tar and rope, where gulls write quick white sentences against a gray sky and then erase them. Streets of board and brick, houses of heart pine, porches with memory in their rails. The air a thin chill tastes of smoke from cook stoves and something else that people don't want to name, not yet. Cape Fear moves past like a long thought that refuses to end. If you stand still, the river will do your walking for you. You'll drift past cotton bales, naval stores, barrels of turpentine, the business of a port that calls itself modern, while its timbers still remember old ships and older cargoes. Listen, the city arranges itself by sound. Wagon iron, hoof on stone, a saw's thin cry in a carpenter's yard. Hymn fragments from a weekday service, a school bell smaller kinder than the bells we met a moment ago. Newspapers slap counters, their pages giving off that faint mineral smell, ink-lead heat. In one office, the presses hum with a confidence learned from habit. In another, men glance too often at the door, waiting. Always waiting the way people do when they have written their truth and now must meet the price of it. Names assemble. Neighborhoods too. A district of black-owned shops where the glass is clean and the paint still new. Tailor's grocers, a printer, a dressmaker, with a window that catches the afternoon light just so. A public school with children walking two and two, sometimes three, sometimes breaking ranks when laughter wins. Churches that anchor the week, a wooden chapel where the benches hold the polish of years. A choir loft that faces a door someone will lock carefully after service. A bell whose rope has learned hands, voices separations. In houses close by, a framed certificate from a war only recently concluded abroad, and a pension letter folded too many times from a war long past at home. Reconstruction did not come here as a rumor. It came as a ledger, teachers' names, marriage registrations, labor contracts that were promises and arguments at once. Watch power arrange itself not in cloaks, but in calendars and chairs. City offices where black men have held responsibility. Not as an experiment, but as work. As the ordinary civic business of a majority choosing its representatives and asking to be measured by the math that counts votes. A courthouse whose corridors echo the same as any other public building, though lately the echo feels taller, hungrier. A police station where routine writes most of the ledger until it doesn't. A board of aldermen that understands both the price of printing a budget and the cost of not printing the truth. Wilmington is not an exception, and that is exactly what makes it dangerous to some. Outside the buildings, a campaign has been running for months, speeches, handbills, parades of men in red shirts who convert streets into statements. Horses step with the offhand discipline of practice. Rifles wear coats the way secrets wear polite smiles. And music, lively, brassy, cheerful enough to make the point seem less like a threat and more like a celebration of order. Order as in the kind that rolls back a clock and calls the rollback virtue. On corners, talk turns plain, which ballots will count, which won't, who will sit where when November is done, who will never sit again. The Spanish-American War has just ended. Flags are still bright from parade, and men home from distant fights find a nearer cause that promises clarity. Restore, redeem, remove. Words that begin softly and end with doors closing. In parlors lit by kerosene, a different conversation, quieter, but not small. Teachers marking sums, preachers revising Sunday notes, women planning a supper to raise money for a neighbor's widow, a physician setting his bag in a chair so the leather won't lose its shape. The black middle class of Wilmington has its own calendar. Its steady logistics guild meetings, lodge rituals, the small infrastructure of a people intent on being thorough citizens. Their progress is not performative, it's practical. Children in school uniforms that fit mortgages paid in tidy ledger lines, a shelf with 3 novels, and a Bible beside the minutes of last month's Improvement Association. A city is a living argument about belonging. Here the case has been made cleanly publicly, and success itself has become Exhibit A for those who cannot bear it. Down by the wharves, weathered men measure winds without instruments and predict what the river will let go, what it will keep. A rope creaks in a dock cleat, a small sound that manages to feel prophetic. The smell of pitch and plank salt and iron, the ingredients of both ships and stories. Step away from the river, and Wilmington rises in blocks and modest heights, shops stitched into streets, alleys, learning the private grammar of every town, how to hide, how to help, how to guide a body from one fate to another. Children know which fences can be climbed, which can only be leaned on. Dogs know who belongs. Cats know everything and tell no one. Morning papers boast growth shipments, the sweet logic of commerce, and then pivot to another tone. A rhetoric firm enough to weld fear to policy. Stability, the word says. Decency. Safety. Phrases that do their work by not saying the other part aloud. The campaign has learned how to make the ordinary nervous. It has learned how to take one line in a rival paper and hang a season on it. It has learned that a bell can do more than call congregants, it can make a crowd feel like permission. And a crowd that feels permitted will often do what a few men privately decided weeks before. Now the room where the daily record was set. Not mythwood iron oil. Types sorted into cases by fingers that know their home row. Not on a keyboard, but in drawers where letters sleep in their own neighborhoods. The editor's chair stands with the mild authority of furniture that outlasts its owners. On a shelf bound volumes of last year's truths, each spine a calendar of arguments. A window with the kind of light printers like, flat honest, no surprises. Here the day is measured in impressions and invoices, and the hope that accuracy will be enough protection for honesty. It is a lovely hope. It is also tender in a town where other men are composing a different font, tall red letters that march in the street and promise to settle matters that law has left too complicated. Walk 3 blocks you can. Wilmington is a city of distances meant for feet. You pass a school after spills, then sutures itself as a teacher appears in the doorway. The soft discipline of a raised eyebrow. The kind that says, children are made of breath and future, not just obedience. You pass a Baptist church, a deacon carries a box of coal across a yard where leaves have arranged themselves into a kind of quilt. You pass a house with new paint, the brush line still visible, and in the window, a photograph of a man in uniform, straight as a command. Triumph sits side by side with fragility, the American pairing. Somewhere else, in a newspaper office, with a larger press, men are learning sentences that behave like switches. They try them out loud. The cadence must be right. The echo must be easy to memorize. Reclaim, redeem, restore. Keep the alliteration, the tongue likes it. Keep the enemy simple, the mind asks for it. Ask for peace, mean control. Make sure to do it with a smile that suggests you've merely come to tidy the room. Politics can be a housekeeping metaphor when the house being cleaned belongs to someone else. Evening rehearses itself at noon, as if the city were practicing. A red shirt patrol uses daylight to memorize routes it will take by lamplight. A committee meets to decide who will be escorted from office, as if the verb were gentle. A pastor makes a list of congregants who should avoid the square for a few days. A mother folds an extra shawl into a satchel she hopes she will not need. Everyone is making small plans courage's daily form. And because every American story of this kind sits on land and memory, the soil speaks. Pine roots that once held the feet of men who cut turpentine cups into trees. Sand that banked brick kilns while Wilmington built itself a face. Clay that keeps secrets until rain decides to tell them. The ground here has known chains and then votes. And now the tension of those two histories sharing one street. If you kneel and put your hand to the dirt, it is the same temperature as a pew in an unheated church. Cold, but not cruel. Waiting to be warmed by bodies that stay. We mark time carefully. November 8th, ballots. November 9th, rumors. November 10th, the choreography that pretends to be spontaneous. But the calendar does not show the quieter ledger meetings carried by a nod. Ammunition counted by a man who says he likes numbers. A lawyer drafting a resignation in passive voice. A printer who checks his rollers twice, not because he is superstitious, but because he believes in thoroughness the way some men believe in providence. The city keeps its 2 books, the official one and the lived one, and both will matter when we return to the bells. For now, see Wilmington whole, the good coat and the rope, the ledger and the hymn, the lesson book and the handbill, the cradle and the cartridge box in the drawer beneath it. This is not a stage built for tragedy. It is a town built for living, which is why tragedy chooses it. The light falls narrow and honest. The river keeps its appointment with the sea. A boy practices letters on a slate the curve of an ER, stubborn and proud. Somewhere a woman counts to 13 under her breath, and the day does not know yet that she is right. Somewhere else a man in a fine hat congratulates himself on learning how to make force look like order. Wilmington, 1898. A city with enough hope to be worth stealing enough record, to be worth burning enough voice, to be worth silencing. We will walk its streets slowly, not to stage a spectacle, but to show you the ordinary, because ordinary is the measure of loss. Keep listening. The next turn reveals the first hard page, and pages when hard do not soften by themselves. Begin with the paper, because paper remembers in straight lines even when the day did not. The Daily Record, Wilmington, North Carolina. Columns set by tired hands, a masthead that looked like any other, until it became a target. In the months before November, the editor, calm, deliberate, weighed words like a carpenter weighs timberload span, what the frame can hold. He wrote about schools, about wages, about the arithmetic of ballots and the decency of counting them. He wrote about dignity not as ornament, but as a municipal utility, the way a city needs clean water, passable streets, a press that refuses to whisper. And then he wrote the piece everyone insists was the spark, though the tinder had been stacked long before. It was not a curse. It was a mirror, the kind of mirror that will always offend someone who has learned to live without one. Facts first. Numbers that don't flinch. In 1898, Wilmington's black citizens formed a majority of the population. They owned businesses. They taught in public schools. They held city offices not as tokens, but as neighbors selected by neighbors. The vote had made the map look like possibility. The paper had made the conversation sound like adulthood. The port had made the economy behave like a promise. None of this was myth, it was ledger and street ink and receipts. And precisely because it was ordinary, it became dangerous. Across town, another paper, larger, louder, learned to turn fear into meter. Redemption men found a music reclaim, restore, redeem. A parade uniform helped red shirts on blue days. Brass instruments at corners where conversation strayed toward courage. Meetings thinned the distance between suggestion and plan. A white Declaration of Independence was drafted. Florid, self-assured, a document that replaced the quiet arithmetic of citizenship with the bold cursive of removal. Words can be ballots. Words can be batons. These would be both. The record's office, 3 rooms, and a stair that complained in the polite way old stairs do. A front counter with the day's edition stacked in a neat geometry. A back room where the press lived like a domesticated beast, oil iron patience. On the wall, a calendar turned to November, because reality insisted. A photograph of people arranged so carefully you can hear the photographer's instructions in their stillness. The editor's pen, nothing elegant, scratched the way honest tools do. He chose verbs that walked, not galloped. He chose nouns that could stand by themselves without adjective crutches. He addressed rumors the way a physician addresses fever. Name it cool. It insist on water, insist on rest. He knew rumor multiplied more quickly than print, but he also knew rumor disliked light. Folklore enters, not to contradict, but to contour the record where the record is too straight. They say the church bell near 4th Street developed a second voice that autumn, a thin overnote. A hairline crack that made the ring carry a shadow of itself. They say a sexton could tell from the first 2 pulls whether the third would mean prayer or gathering, and that he sometimes kept his palm against the rope after the second, as if touching a pulse that might calm itself. They say 13 is not only a number, but a method, a way to count yourself out of somebody else's plan. Return to paper, a clipping from late summer. A letter to the editor that argues without snarling, asking that law be law for every neighbor, and that decency be the public language. Another clipping, a speech delivered on the square by a candidate who preferred drama to detail his sentences, flexed like men rolling their shoulders before a fight. The Record printed the speech because news is news, then printed a rebuttal because truth dislikes leaving rooms unaired. Somewhere between those paragraphs, a bridge began to sag. The bridge between disagreement and permission. The school ledgers tell a quieter story. Names, first, last, ages ironed out to whole numbers that abbreviate childhood. Attendance marked with the patience of teachers who learned how to hope professionally. A notation in a margin stove repaired. Another reader number 2 delivered. The mundane is a revolution when people have been denied it. It is also tinder when others decide it should not have been possible. Listen to the wharf, the slow grammar of rope and sail, the small economy of hands that know how to tie lift stow. Dock talk is empirical pounds feet tide hours. But even at the waterline, rhetoric traveled that year. Men came off boats and found themselves recruited by stories, the kind that put uniforms on a grievance and march it past a window until a boy watching decides that this is what grown strength looks like. The Record printed the tariff schedules and the cotton prices. Others printed the drumbeat. Folklore insists on faces it won't let us retreat into documents only. A woman at a kitchen table teaching a child to write his name letter by letter, the slate a stubborn surface that somehow helps memory. She says without looking up, when you hear one bell, finish what you are doing. When you hear 2, sit down. When you hear 3, come to me. The child nods, a little solemn ceremony, a ritual made to fit in the pocket of an ordinary day. The rule becomes a household amendment, a constitution for survival. Courthouse minutes, neat procedural record budgets, licenses, road repairs, and then in early November begin to wobble. The entries crowd. The handwriting tightens a script that looks like breath held too long. A resolution is proposed that feels less like civic housekeeping and more like rehearsed replacement. No one writes coup in a minute book. That is not what minute books are for. But silence can be descriptive when you know what to listen for. The Record, for its part, printed what could be proved votes cast, results tallied, offices filled. It did not print bravado. It did not print rumor as fact. It printed a city trying to be a city. Neighbors talk in thresholds, leaning, low-voiced. Stay home, one says. Stay ready, another replies, and both are right. A deacon postpones an evening choir practice. A grocer closes early with an apology that sounds like instructions. A teacher wraps 2 extra readers with twine and leaves them on her desk, just in case tomorrow's lesson needs to travel to a different room. Folklore says the air itself felt slanted, as if the town were a table leaning ever so slightly toward one door. The editor writes, not because he believes words will stop what men have decided, but because choosing not to write is a worse betrayal. He edits his own sentences a shade gentler than usual. Perhaps he too hears 3 bells waiting. He includes names, always names, because anonymity is a habitat for lies. He lists vote totals because math has its own quiet courage, because the integer is a civic instrument, because one person, one is more than an arithmetic slogan. It is a vocabulary of belonging. In the proofroom, the compositor taps a line with his forefinger, checking spacing, a small gesture almost tender. He does not consider himself brave. He considers himself precise. Precision on mornings like these is a kind of bravery. Elsewhere in a larger office, with a chandelier that throws light like thrown coins, a committee sharpens plans. They have a manifesto to deliver. It must sound like reason wearing a waistcoat. They have resignations to collect. They will call the process peaceable, as if language could sand the wood of a battering ram. They have a press to burn. They won't say burn. They'll say, remove the nuisance, restore calm, protect our women, save the city, the sorts of phrases that replace verbs with costumes. If anyone mentions blood, it is as a hypothetical, a thing they hope not to see, while ensuring the possibility. They agree to meet near dawn. Bells are discussed. Bells are useful. The Record publishes what will be its last issue before the morning turns. It looks like all the others, which is part of its dignity. In small type, a legal notice that will never be read in court. A marriage announcement that will never see the photograph. An advertisement for a tailor whose tape measure has known the measure of prosperity and the measure of mourning. On the editorial page, space is tight, facts, crowd tone remains even. The lead is not a dare. It is a duty cleared with care from a path of rumor. Folklore tells of a door that used to stick suddenly, swinging easily the night before. Of a dog that lay under the editor's desk and for the first time would not settle. Of the way the air carried a tin taste you could only notice if you had breathed the city long enough to know when it changed. These are not proofs. They are textures, the grain of lived experience. Dismiss them and you lose the subject. Rely on them and you risk embroidery. We carry both with caution because both walk the same streets. The church sexton, an old man younger than his back, polishes the bell frame with a cloth that has learned patience. He checks the rope for wear. Fiber parted means signal broken, and on certain days, a broken signal is a mercy. He tests the clapper, once a dry tick, barely a syllable. He looks out across a town that has not yet chosen its next hour. He closes the side door and slides the bolt. Not because he believes a bolt can hold back what is coming, but because a bolt is a sentence a man can complete. Then he sits hands on knees, counting to 13 by twos. A child's game assigned to an old man's task. At the margins of the record, a boy copies his letters onto paper he will fold and hide, because folding is a way to keep things from spilling. He writes his name, then the editor's, as if sharing a line could share a fate. He listens, hears one bell, then two, then the long breath, then three. He does not move. He remembers the rule. He presses his palm to the wood floor, feeling vibration, conducted through timber, the city's nervous system talking to itself. He is practicing survival, which is also a form of witness. Night before the morning, men in red shirts rehearse their roles with that mix of confidence and superstition that characterizes every troop. Weapons oiled, speech lines memorized, routes chosen. Someone laughs too loudly and is shushed, not because noise is risky, but because every ritual asks for a seriousness that feels like respect for the thing about to be done. They tell themselves they are restoring order. They will later insist they were rescuing something delicate from rough hands. Some will believe it because believing it makes the mirror easier. The editor sleeps briefly, then wakes into the kind of clarity that feels like the page just before ink. He eats bread, last night's drinks, coffee gone cool, a practical man's sacrament, and arranges his desk as if neatness could bargain with chaos. He touches the top sheet of today's edition the way a parent touches the shoulder of a child before the door opens to a street they cannot control. He checks his watch. He hears the first bell. Fact and folklore braid here. Tighter than comfort allows. Fact says a paper stood, then a paper fell. Offices were seized. Officials forced out. A city's government rewritten at gunpoint. Folklore says the bell learned a second language. The air kept a diary. 13 saved a handful of names from being listed under fate unknown. Fact says witnesses disagree on sequence, agree on intent. Folklore says the echo remembers what the ear cannot hold. We will walk into the morning with both in our hands, one hand open for documents, the other cupped to catch a whisper before it evaporates. The last detail before the door, the editor takes his coat from the chair. The chair sighs, the way wood sighs, after a long season. He looks once at the press, its flywheel still dignified, and in that look, there is a civics lesson no constitution ever printed. He extinguishes the lamp with a practiced breath. Outside, the third bell finishes its word. The city, having cleared its throat, begins to speak not in sentences, but in boots, in smoke, in the way a crowd learns a single idea and calls it necessity. We step through with the record and the rumor, the ledger and the legend. Because to leave either behind is to mishear Wilmington. And mishearing in a city of bells is how harm begins. Dawn breaks, thin, reluctant, the kind of light that seems to ask the day if it's sure. The first wagon rattles past the record's block driver, looking forward too hard. A signal men share when they have decided not to see. One bell, then two, then the third longer, harsher. The note you feel in the ribs. A door opens on 4th Street, then another, as if the neighborhood itself were a lung learning someone else's breathing. The city lifts a little and tilts toward Market, toward the steeple, toward the square where decisions dress as crowds. A boy stands in a doorway counting 1, 2. Stop his palm on the jamb, his ear on the wood, the way children listen with their whole bodies. Across from him, a woman knots a scarf at her throat, not for cold, but for courage. The small armor of cloth. She says a rule softly. When you hear 3, you come to me, and the words float like lint in the slanted light. Somewhere a dog starts to bark at nothing obvious, a habit that has saved more lives than witness statements ever will. The first incident men at the corner who don't ordinarily stand together, trades that rarely share hours, suddenly matching the clock. Their faces are set to purpose, the kind that rehearses its lines as it walks. Someone carries a folded paper like a warrant. Someone else carries a length of rope like it belongs to ceremony. A third keeps his hands free because leadership prefers the choreography of pointing. A red shirt detachment, not yet parading, calibrates its pace to the bell, not military, not worship. Something in between that borrows the dignity of both. They turn toward the record. The street gives. Inside, the editor lifts the shade, then lowers it again. The practical ritual of measuring a morning. He straightens a stack of papers he already straightened. He writes a single line on a scrap and pockets it as if a sentence might be a small passport he could show to what's coming. The press is still. The room's engine has been turned off by a man who knows not to leave moving parts unattended when strangers approach. He listens. He has heard many kinds of footsteps, readers, peddlers, creditors, neighbors, and he knows this cadence is none of them. Second incident, a delegation at City Hall that is not in form, a mob. Coats, buttoned hats, brush the performance of reasonable. They carry the white declaration in their inside pockets, the way men carry permits, ready to legalize what has been in every private room already decided. Their leader clears his throat at the threshold, an actor finding the first word. They request resignations, the verb tidy as a napkin, and receive the kind of answer that makes furniture heavy hesitation. Then refusal. Then the small, stunned silence of a hinge, choosing which direction it will swing. Someone informs them with professional politeness that the sheriff is not a door that can simply be exchanged. Someone else suggests that doors are only wood, and wood under pressure obeys. On the wharf, third incident, a roomer comes in with a barge, as if rumor were part of the cargo manifest. They're marching, someone says. They're only petitioning, someone else corrects. And between those two adverbs, the day begins to split. Dock workers lift crates with the rough grace of men who respect weight. They do not spill flour. They will not spill words. But even here, ropes seem to creak a little higher on the octave. Gulls circle as if they recognize a pattern from last winter, and a man who never leaves his bench before 11 stands now early and walks inland. His absence is a bell the river hears. The record's block, now the center of the camera's patient drift, gathers its own chorus. A row of faces appears at second-floor windows, some familiar, some not. The species of curiosity that becomes sympathy, then strategy, then either bravery or withdrawal, depending on the minute. A milkman pauses too long, places the bottles quietly on a stoop, and departs the way a person exits a room where a family is about to argue. A deacon with keys in his pocket touches them, To be sure they exist, metal becomes reassurance, a secular rosary, and keeps walking slower toward a side door of the chapel. Fourth incident. The press room door bears a knock that is not a request. Knuckles wrapped in glove leather perform politeness with force. A voice asks for the editor by a surname that has learned how to carry contempt without raising its volume. Another voice says almost kindly, "We'll have the keys now." The editor answers through wood the prudent distance of furniture and offers to meet at the front counter. The men refuse the choreography. They prefer the efficiency of back ways. The editor opens because locks are not designed for ceremonies like these, and the room inhales strangers' boots. Breath the smell of a cause that has been handled too many times to be clean. They search with the confidence of people who believe possession is 9/10 of any noun. One man lifts a bundle of proofs and sneers at the usefulness of rectangles. Another runs a finger along the press as if checking for dust. The insult of domestic critique. The rope man. Every group has one, finds the fire barrel and taps it with his boot, the sort of gesture that writes itself into later testimony as a precaution. The editor asks for a warrant, the way a pharmacist asks for a prescription. The men shrug. The shrug is a signature in a town that has decided signatures are optional. At City Hall, the tide inside the chambers turns. Fifth incident, a vote is taken that has no ballot. The room itself raises its hand. Resignations are accepted. Replacements are sworn. The verbs do the violence by appearing neutral. A newly minted official signs a paper with a pen that looks startled to be participating. Outside, the bells give another long measure, not church hours. Chapter headings. A clerk who knows the value of sequence pauses over a ledger line, should before be replaced with after. Should now be written. Should anything be written that contradicts the day's new grammar? Smoke appears at the record, not flame. Not yet. A whisper cursive that threads ceiling beams, that curls around movable type and learns the alphabet as it rises. The first lick of heat is not seen, but felt. The air finds a sharper edge. Eyes smart. A cough interrupts a sentence. Paper renders quickly, not dramatic. Resigned, a gray surrender that makes a sound like snow one room over. A stack of yesterday's truths slumps into itself. Someone says, out. Someone else says, leave it burn. And the argument ends when the third bell stretches another syllable into the street. Sixth incident, on a back lot near the chapel. The sexton keeps his palm flat on the rope and does not pull. He counts to 13, twice, and hopes the arithmetic still works when the city has changed its mathematics. He opens the side door for 3 women and a small boy, couches them into the half-light of the transept, the old choreography of refuge. He blows lamp wicks out with a practiced mercy. Less light means fewer targets, and places a bucket by the threshold. Though there is no fire here. Habit can be a superstition and a strategy at once. The square 7th incident receives what it was built for: declarations that pretend to be spontaneous. A man reads the white declaration aloud, his voice trained for courts and fairs, not for truth. The crowd answers in the monosyllables. Crowds prefer yes, no, now, go. A boy climbs a statue base to see better, and a hand lifts him down, protection or instruction, depending on who tells it later. The sound rises not just in volume, but in temperature tone as weather. A woman at a second-floor window closes the sash carefully, as if noise were a draft. The record 8th incident moves from smoke to open flame. Not a single showy conflagration, but a practical one. Corners first. Joists catching like careful readers. A disciplined burn that treats a press as if it were a stump to be cleared. The editor does not plead. Pleading is a genre he doesn't publish. He asks for the ledgers. Even now he thinks of accounts of wages, of the small justice of numbers, and is told that none of it matters. He looks once at the men, then longer at the machine, the quiet iron companion of his vocation. And in that look, there is a sentence he will never set in type. This is how silence is composed. Ninth incident. A line of men moves from the record toward designated houses, a circuit already mapped in pocket notebooks. Addresses learned by heart the way scripture is learned by repetition until meaning is replaced by muscle. Knocks become commands. Doors become assertions. Parlors become stages for decisions that will be called voluntary for the sake of paperwork. A teacher signs something she does not agree with to avoid something she cannot survive. A clerk stamps something he cannot understand to keep the room from getting louder. The choreography spreads. The city is a graph. Edges lighting up. Nodes going dark. By the River 10th incident, a cluster of men who did not intend to be participants finds itself conscripted by proximity. They are handed instructions and the kind of authority that comes on loan. One refuses quietly and is ignored. Another hesitates and is noticed. A third obeys and will spend years telling himself that obedience is not the same as endorsement. The barge horn, late unnecessary, lets out a bleat that sounds like a comment the river forgot to make earlier. Even water has the right to be untimely. Between incidents, the city practices forgetting. Walls learn to hear less. Shutters learn to weigh more. Words learn to select smaller rooms. But memory is persistent in wood chairs. Keep the shape of the bodies that grip them. Thresholds register the rush of feet. A ledger in an office across town acquires 3 new names in a column titled Vacant. The ink is still wet when a hand blots it, a domestic mercy performed on an administrative cruelty. A choir loft unused today smells of wax and cedar. The hymn books are shut with the gentleness reserved for sleeping infants. Even reverence pauses. 11th incident, a misfire. A crack that shouldn't have happened. The crowd flinches into stillness, and in that half-second truth appears naked fear, raw and startled. The spell returns almost immediately. Someone laughs too loudly. Someone shouts the word accident as if words can close holes in air. But the moment lingers. Even uniforms blush at the reminder that scripts, however rehearsed, still carry risk. In a second-story bedroom, a child clamps hands over ears and counts wrong and starts over the discipline of survival is a curriculum. 12th incident. The courthouse staircase absorbs the weight of a new government. The tread remembers other shoes. The risers complain. An official who was an official yesterday shakes hands with his successor, the ritual ugly in its grace, and exits with a folder that contains nothing sharp, nothing that could cut, nothing that could be argued with later. The folder is a prop. The real transfer rests in the guns that do not have to be raised anymore to be understood. The clerk writes sworn beside a name and does not write the part about the bells. And still in kitchens, small scenes. A pot is moved from flame. A letter is slid into a Bible. A photograph is wrapped in cloth. The micro-engineering of endurance that never makes it to minutes or memoirs. The woman with the scarf counts to 13 and then to 13 again, because arithmetic can be prayer when prayer will not answer. The boy traces his name on the underside of a table with a finger, the ink he doesn't have, replaced by the oil of his skin, a signature the wood will keep invisible for decades. Toward noon, the ash of the press drifts like tired weather. The bells fall into a rhythm that could almost be called normal if you did not know them better. The square clears a little. The men whose names will appear in histories shake dust from cuffs. The men whose names will not appear go home by back ways. City Hall breathes like a building that has been rearranged without moving a single wall. Wilmington looks at a glance like itself. But the map that matters, the map of permission, has been redrawn. We catalog the incidents. 12 is enough for now, not to indulge the theater, but to show the mechanism. Crowds are machines powered by stories. Bells are gears, papers are belts and pulleys. Ledgers are the teeth that turn slower longer. The morning did not explode. It clicked forward, notch by notch, engineered to appear inevitable. And yet, between the clicks, there were breaths. There were choices. There were hands that did not pull ropes. Signatures not given. Doors opened for refuge. Names whispered to be remembered later. Hold those gaps. The human pauses where history's jaw could have closed harder and didn't, or did. We are not done. The ash has not finished settling. The ledger has not finished lying. The folklore has not finished telling the second ring from the third. Ahead, the next part where facts must stand in full daylight, and folklore, stubborn as a hymn, will walk beside them anyway. Keep listening. The bells have grown quiet, but their instructions linger, like smoke in cloth, like breath in a cold room, like a sentence the city began and never had to finish. Begin with daylight, because daylight is where records prefer to live. By noon, Wilmington looks almost orderly. The smoke is thinned. The square has learned a new choreography. The bell rope hangs still, as if none of it asked for its strength. But paper is busy. Pens are busy. The machinery of after begins to print itself. We open the ledgers, the courthouse minutes, the police blotter the telegraphs that travel to Raleigh and back, and let each line show its temperature. In the council chamber, signatures, names arranged into the sentence the morning demanded, offices vacated, offices filled, oaths administered with a stateliness that tries to dress itself as continuity. The phrases read calm, accepted, resolved hereby, until further notice, as if the verbs were neutral air. A clerk draws a careful line through yesterday's title beside a man's name, writes today's title above it, and dots an I with the discipline of someone who knows dots matter. The ledger is straight. The hallway is quiet. The bell outside does not comment. Order on paper is the easiest part of any disorder. Across town, the record's remains become inventory. A constable doing his duty with professional distance writes the dimensions of ruin as if he were describing a crate room 60 by 20. Contents press type office furniture. Condition unserviceable. He will not write burned because he has been taught to prefer nouns over verbs. A witness offers a sentence. It is taken down. It will be hard to find later because statements that refuse to harmonize with the chorus often misfile themselves. The constable initials the page, folds it, and moves on. Fact, entered. Fact, cooled. At the jail bookings releases. The indifferent pendulum of municipal routine. 2 men are noted for disorderly conduct, a phrase wide enough to house anything useful. Another is recorded as escorted for safety, which is not bail and not arrest. A category that lets a city touch a body without acknowledging force. A deputy writes no incident beside a line that had an incident. He does not think of it as a lie. He thinks of it as loading the day with fewer sparks. The telegraph operator, whose ear is trained more finely than any official's hears distant counties, asks Wilmington if the morning has ended. He keeps his answers short. Wires prefer brevity, and the truth prefers to travel in longer sentences than wire will allow. Fact gathers bolder. Now the governor's desk receives telegrams shaped like warnings and shaped like congratulations, depending on authorship. A sheriff's report mentions agitation contained. A mayor's letter authored from a chair that changed occupants while the ink dried assures Raleigh that calm prevails. Calm in official correspondence often means the loud part is over. A minister writes privately to a denominational paper. Upstate, he chooses the vocabulary of lament, not accusation, because print that aims to travel far chooses its armor carefully. In a school ledger, attendance slumps. The teacher writes the reason as whether a euphemism older than any bell. We step closer. Affidavits. A store owner swears to seeing the crowd convene with deliberate steps. A neighbor testifies that the press ignited at corners like a plan knows its hinges. A city worker affirms that the resignations were delivered as requests and accepted as necessities, his quotation marks standing duty, where his courage might not. A woman declines to swear anything. She prefers the privacy of memory to the publicness of paper and sets aside the pen as if it were a match. These pages will later scatter like leaves. Some will be found, some will not. The pattern will resemble wind more than design. The river not to be left out records by smell. Pitch thin in the afternoon. Ash damp on the tongue. A sharper iron note that the water knows from other centuries. Barges go about their schedule. Commerce refuses the luxury of symbol. But the men moving cargo learn another kind of weight, the kind that does not register on scales. They send nothing to Raleigh. The river's report is always oral, always unofficial, and therefore often truer in the places official truth declines to visit. Here folklore insists on a parallel ledger, an index of signs. The sexton who pulled no rope sits on the back steps of the chapel and says he heard a fourth ring that nobody else heard, not a bell, not metal. Something in the air itself, the sound timber makes when a city's shape is changed without a saw. He keeps this to himself until evening and then says it to a friend. As if he were reporting a dream he isn't sure belongs to him. A woman tells the child the story of the day. The bell looked ashamed, and the boy asks how metal can look. And she says, by the shadow it casts. A fisherman claims that at slack tide the river whispered names back to him. Names he had not spoken aloud. Names that made him set his net down and count to 13 without knowing why. Fact marches on newspapers in neighboring towns, print accounts with laudatory adverbs. Papers farther north hedge nouns with adjectives like alleged, reported, said to be. The record cannot answer, and absence is a poor advocate. In a ledger, we will consult decades later, a city treasurer initials a transfer of funds for public safety, a line whose numbers do not reveal whether the money bought calm or bought the instruments by which calm was defined. In personal diaries, that other refuge of candor, somebody writes bell, smoke, papers, and then tears the page out, not because he fears search, but because the sound of the pen on that line felt like complicity. If we step into private rooms, with the gentleness documentary requires, we find the routines of survival calibrating themselves. The teacher wraps readers in twine and sends them home under coats because school may need to exist in kitchens tomorrow. A dressmaker moves a heavy mirror so that it no longer faces the street. Seeing too much can be a kind of vulnerability. A doctor sets a stethoscope on a windowsill and watches the square from behind curtain lace, counting faces he may be asked to see later, counting the seconds between the bell's last ring and the next decision. A deacon writes a list of congregants to check on. He will walk the alleys at dusk, with his hat low, carrying nothing except a pocket psalm and the habit of showing up. We tip the page, and folklore deepens. Children begin to collect second-ring stories, trying them on in whispers, the way children always do, making rules of what they cannot measure. One says the second ring means sit down. Another says it means do not name the street out loud. A third insists the second ring is the breath before command, and you must fill it with your own name quietly, so that power cannot. A young man swears he saw ash float upward and then change direction, like paper, choosing, he says. And the older men shake their heads until they are alone, and then do not shake their heads. Afternoon, and now the official record attempts to fasten the day to a narrative. A proclamation is drafted and read, the sentences tidy and sure for the peace to preserve in recognition of the will of the citizens. The word citizens does heavy lifting it was not designed to do. A petition circulates as if it were a relief effort. People sign not to agree but to avoid being counted among those who did not a census of caution. The courthouse clock keeps time. Clocks do not take sides, but people do, and the minutes wrap themselves around whichever side offers a stool to rest on. Fact. In the hands of those who prefer one color of truth, gains adjectives that make themselves at home, provocative, incendiary, necessary a triad that builds its own staircase to the room where outcomes sit. In the houses where people will not read those papers, cannot read or will not read, or are busy with the work of holding a life together, time moves in smaller units the length of a kettle's boil. The time it takes a child to copy a line neatly once the distance between one knock and the next. Small time is where truth rests, while the big time shouts. We return to documents because we must. A coroner's book notes entries. The way coroner's books do cool numbered the word cause a blank that a professional hand fills with a noun that can survive scrutiny. We will not list them here, not because they don't matter, but because this voice knows the difference between witness and spectacle. A lawyer drafts a letter that he will not send a draft that says more than mail can carry a record of what he thought before he learned what thinking aloud costs. A visiting reporter copies names into a pocket notebook, some spelled wrong, some right. The fieldwork of a narrative that will be fought sentence by sentence the moment it is printed. Folklore irrepressible taps the shoulder again. An old woman says the cat would not cross the threshold until the bells stopped. And when it did, it walked backward, tail down, and the room fell silent. A boy declares that he saw the steeple's shadow turn the corner too fast, as if it were trying to outrun itself. A choir director hears the hymn, "Guide me, O Thou, great Jehovah," take on a different rhythm, slower, heavier, and decides not to rehearse it that week. Not because he is afraid, but because he recognizes when a song wants a day to itself. Late afternoon, a letter arrives from a friend inland, the kind of letter that tries to be comfort and becomes a record. It says, "We have heard. We pray. Send word." The editor, who will soon leave the city under escort, reads it once and puts it in his pocket as if paper could be a hand on a shoulder. He writes no reply. The bell has done enough dictating of sentences. Men arrive with their tidy word for removal, a company, and the hallway swallows their footsteps like water taking a thrown stone. The fact of departure will have paperwork a line in a rail manifest. A hotel registry in another town that carries a name like an echo. A letter months later with the return address discreetly absent. The folklore of departure will have different entries, a door that would not latch after he left, as if the house insisted on staying open. A lamp that burned low with a steady flame, as if it understood rationing. A chair that creaked at odd hours, as if practicing a man's old weight. Both ledgers will live long, one in archives, one in households, and both will need each other when memory begins, as it always does, to select. When night leans in, Wilmington tries out its new quiet. On paper, the calm has already been declared. In kitchens, calm is negotiated among chores and caution. The bell rests. The rope untwists itself a fraction, fibers relaxing after service. Men in offices congratulate themselves on proving that verbs can be made to behave. Women in back rooms place photographs under quilts, not hiding. Preserving the difference is moral and practical. The river combs ash from the air softly the way a mother smooths a child's hair after a fever. We add one more layer of fact. The lists that will be cited by historians who catalog such days with the rigor of surgeons. Office holders' names before and after. Dates, proclamations, counts whose numbers will be debated and corrected and debated again. We clip the documents to the day. With care they are true, and they are not the whole truth. The rest will arrive in voices. The rest will ride hymns into Sundays. The rest will be taught to children as rules that never admit they are history. And one more layer of folklore, the 13 count practiced like scales. The second ring as warning. The rope as a living line that some hands refuse to touch. The way a city's dogs learned which streets to avoid long before their masters did. These are not decorations. They are the sensory record, the archive of breath, ear, skin. Without them, we mishear. With them, we risk poetry. The work is to carry both and not let either bully the other. So we stand at the window a last time and watch the square fold its noise into evening. A deacon closes the chapel door gently. The bolt slides like a period, concluding a line he did not write. A teacher blows out the lamp in her schoolroom and leaves the stack of readers in the dark, small rectangular, hopes that smell faintly of glue and ink. The editor's desk stands empty. The chair remembers. On the courthouse wall, the clock declares itself innocent of hour. On the river, a faint tide turns. Fact says the government of Wilmington was forcibly rearranged. A black press was destroyed. Citizens were driven out. Letters went north. Reports went south. The official sentences stayed tidy. Folklore says the bell learned shame. The air kept score. 13 saved more than arithmetic would predict. Together they say, "This do not let the calm of paper erase the noise of breath. Do not let the noise of breath erase the discipline of paper. Hear them braided, not for drama, for accuracy." We close the files for tonight, not because the record is complete, but because the page must turn. Ahead, the bridge where all these lines must cross. The quiet climax, where the archive runs out and the echo takes over. The place where even the bell's rope is only fiber, and the choice is human. Keep listening. Keep the count. And if you hear the second ring in your own city sit, breathe. Refuse the third. Begin at the bridge. Not the wooden span over water, but the place where records lean toward echoes, where paper ends and breath continues. Where a city performs calm while its corners inventory absence. Evening gathers like a slow verdict. Wilmington pretends to be finished, ledger lines closed, proclamations posted, chairs rearranged so convincingly that a stranger might miss the hinge in the day. But if you stand very still, if you match your breathing to the river's slow draw, you can hear the last line crease. You can feel the page about to turn and find nothing. The editor sits in a borrowed room, hat on his knee coat, folded with the care one gives to a companion, and listens to a street that will not say his name aloud. He has been accompanied a word chosen for its softness, a word that hides the bruise inside its sleeve. He is not in his office. The office is ash and iron, and a smell the wind carries past other people's dinners. He is not in City Hall. City Hall has learned new signatures. He is not in church. The sexton has locked the side door and set his hand on the rope as if to reassure both that restraint is a craft. He is instead in the small geography between public and gone. A room with a clean table, a pitcher of water, a lamp trimmed to humility, and a silence that behaves like furniture. Papers lie before him. Not many a letter from inland, a note from a friend, a receipt for the last shipment of ink and paper items that testify to a life conducted in inches and ounces, the measurable dignity of a trade. He arranges them not because arrangement will improve their force, but because order is its own liturgy. He writes one more line, not an editorial, just a sentence you might say to yourself before a door closes. Tell the truth and survive it. The pen hesitates at the period, then rests. Across town, a committee meets, under light bright enough to flatter certainty. They pronounce the day settled. They prefer the phrase, lesson taken. They talk about markets, investors, reputation, all the nouns that turn public memory into a ledger that can be balanced if you are careful with adjectives. A man with tidy spectacles says the press had become imprudent. Another replies that the press had become unnecessary. They say this without irony, as if a city could be less responsible with fewer sentences. They sign their names, hands steady the way clerks sign manifests for cargo already unloaded. The bell outside gives one small test ring, a metal throat clearing, and is quiet. In the chapel, the sexton sits with his back against the cold wood and counts again, 13. The arithmetic of refusal. A small barricade of numbers. He remembers not the flames, but the moment before the half-breath when a choice could still be counted. He has no ledger, no minutes. His record is palm on rope, ear to air, a catalog of textures, fiber, smoke, breath. He will keep it faithfully because he has kept ropes faithfully all his life. Custody is a vocation. The bridge tightens our threads must cross. Fact, a government is rearranged by force and ceremony. Resignations are extracted, replacements sworn. Fact, a black newspaper is destroyed. The city's information economy reduced by a craft that calls itself order. Fact, departures begin, some named, some careful, some unrecorded by anything more official than a neighbor's memory. And folklore, the bell learned shame. The air kept a tally. The second ring whispered about in kitchens became a rule children used to fold fear into something holdable. When fact and folklore clasp, this is where they meet, the room where the editor waits, the square that pretends to be tranquil, the river teaching the town how to move without being seen. Now, the escort. Footsteps in a hallway make that sober music buildings learn on days when history wears shoes. The door opens, not kicked, simply turned, and two men enter with faces set to procedure. They speak with the tone of petitioners who believe they are benefactors. They use the word safety as if it were a blanket they might place over a life. They say best for all concerned and avoid further excitement and temporary. The editor nods, not agreement. Acknowledgement that language has found its costume. He stands, settles his coat on his shoulders, picks up the hat, and looks once at the lamp. The lamp returns the look steady, unblinking, a small tutor in endurance. He blows it out. They move through the corridor walls, remembering other processions, other escorts. On the stair, the new officials' voices from the council chamber drift like paper-thin, weightless present. At the door, the escort pauses, so the editor can step first, the choreography of politeness, performing over the mechanics of removal. Outside, Wilmington's evening appears ordinary. That is the city's new talent. A boy on a stoop looks up and away, the training of children who are not allowed to witness, even when witnessing is the only respectful act left. The bells do not sound. Their silence is loud. To the station, a carriage not hurried. The route avoids the square, avoids the chapel, avoids the corner where the press once stood, as if the city wished to keep the editor from seeing the new geometry of his own absence. Windows show brief vignettes, a dressmaker's lamp shaded low, a schoolroom with readers neatly stacked, a deacon checking a list by touch, a mother lifting a floorboard to slide a small photograph under it. The carriage passes. Doors remain shut. Curtains hold still. Survival is a choreography. It does not announce itself. At the platform, the river's breath reaches even here. A timetable clacks somewhere out of sight. Two porters stand with the posture of men aware that posture is a politics. The escort purchases a ticket with a city's money. The ledger will call this miscellaneous. The editor holds nothing but the hat and a folded letter. He does not look back down the tracks. He looks along them forward because leaving is a verb that deserves dignity even when it is conscripted. The bell inside the station is a small bell for departures only, and its ring is innocent of today's theology. We are approaching the quiet climax, the moment records fear the loss of sequence. The blank where the next entry should be. The page torn neatly along the stitching, leaving only thread to tell you something was there. In the archive, decades later, a file labeled with the editor's name will carry a gap: correspondence before, correspondence after, and in between, a hush. Researchers will note the absence with parentheses and dashes. No extant materials late 1898. And the silence will hum behind those marks like a tone you can hear but cannot measure. The city's minutes will be complete. That is their craft, but their completeness will contain a lie shaped like omission. The bell rope fibers, if saved, would show a darkening where hands grip too hard. But ropes are not records, not officially. Back in the borrowed room after the door closes behind the escort, the lamp still smells of its own extinguished patience. The table carries the ghost of the editor's hat, a shallow oval where felt pressed paper. The water in the pitcher barely moves, then steadies as if a breath left the room and did not return. This is the last line, not the last line of the episode. The last line of the document called Today. It reads, "Accompanied to station." No subject, no object, a passive phrase with clean edges. It will be copied once, then summarized, then footnoted, and the living detail, the tilt of the hat brim, the courteous angle of the escort's elbow. The boy on the stoop will belong to the ledger of folklore because paper has decided it cannot carry them. We cross the bridge fully now, the place where evidence funnels into echo. In kitchens, the second ring rule becomes an evening liturgy. Children repeat it the way they repeat tables of multiplication, not to be clever, to be alive. In the chapel, the sexton releases the rope and rubs his palms, a quiet apology to fiber for a day of holding back. He opens the hymn book to guide me, O thou, great Jehovah, then closes it gently. The song will wait. The day has had enough guidance. On the river, ash settles onto water, spreads, thin, disappears, not erased. Distributed, a physics lesson in how memory travels when it cannot stay. Climax, but not a shout. A hinge. The train pulls in with the tired dignity of schedules. Iron speaking the old language of departure. The editor steps into the car. A conductor nods with that railroad courtesy which treats the rich and the hunted alike, because timetables do not bow. The escort tips his hat, the gesture borrowed from a calmer century, and steps back. The platform does what platforms do, accepts weight, then releases it. The bell inside the station rings once, a small, clear syllable, with no politics at all. The car door closes. Through the window, Wilmington is a composition of roofs and smoke and a steeple that has learned to keep its profile plain. Inside the car, a cita window, a rack above that holds nothing. The editor sets the hat there anyway. Habit is loyal. He takes out the letter from inland, reads it again, folds it twice, and places it in the inner pocket of a coat that has carried truth. The way good coats carry weather, not as suffering as fact. He looks at his hands, ink at the cuticles, a printer's constellation, and smiles without exhibiting teeth. He is not brave, he would say. He was thorough. The train shudders. The page turns. And then the record stops. There is no official sentence for the moment a man becomes an absence in the city that misused his presence. There is only the long line in the archive that leaps from one date to another. The hush in the minutes. The way newspapers elsewhere speak for him, as if he were a quotation they could keep in their fonts. Folklore picks up what falls. It says the bells rang once more unseen after the train left. A single unclaimed note, not triumph, not regret, a species of punctuation. It says a cat crossed the editor's doorstep an hour later, circled, and lay down as if waiting for the man's weight to return to the chair. It says the rope, when finally pulled for vespers, days later felt lighter, the city having learned one less heavy way to call itself together. This is the climax, because it teaches our ear how to hear the rest, not in documents alone, not in whispers alone, but in the seam where both admit their limits. The bridge holds. On one side, the ledger's proclamations, oaths, transfers, timetables, the engineer's drawing of a day. On the other side, rules, murmured in kitchens, hymns, slowed and set aside, children's arithmetic as shield a sexton's palms, marked faintly by fiber, the human blueprint of survival. Between them, the page with the neat tear threads exposed. An invitation and a warning. We will not fill the silence with our own noise. We will step to its edge and mark it. The way curators mark voids in museums, with labels that say fragment missing, so that absence does not masquerade as design. Tomorrow facts will keep arriving, petitions, letters, denials, corrections. Tomorrow, folklore will keep arranging the second ring, the 13, the bell that looked ashamed. But tonight at the bridge we end where the official line ends, and we let the echoes stand beside it. Not as ornament, as witness. Keep your count, keep your light. Keep listening. The page is turned. The next sheet is blank, and the blank is not empty, it is a charge. Morning returns. Not the morning of bells, but the next one, and the next. A sequence of ordinary days, learning how to carry what happened without dropping it. Wilmington adjusts its posture, streets straighten. Officials practice names until the syllables feel inevitable. The square rehearses calm with a competence that almost convinces strangers. Paper multiplies proclamations, denials editorials from elsewhere, and in the flood, the most important fact is quiet, who is missing. Which chairs forget their owners? Which windows stay closed at hours they used to be open? Absence is a civic statistic with no column to stand in. The editor's room is empty, not as theater, as logistics. The hat's shallow oval has left the table. The lamp holds its shape. The pitcher keeps its water for no one. A door that stuck for years suddenly swings clean, a house's small betrayal. Neighbors speak of him with present tense grammar for a week, then soften into past as language learns to accommodate distance. A few letters arrive with careful penmanship, forwarded, returned. Forwarded again, the postal choreography of a departure that never needed to be dignified and yet has learned its own dignity by traveling. Somewhere inland, a registry carries a name in neat ledger print, a date, a room number, then silence. Archives will later shelve that silence between folders with hard edges, a gap labeled with the unromantic sentence, "No extant materials late, 1898. The city's new routine hardens like plaster. Minutes complete themselves. Clerks find their rhythm. The bell returns to polite duties, metal pretending it cannot remember. Schools gather children, churches gather hymns, markets gather coins, politics gathers itself into the shape it wanted all along and calls that shape peace. Newspapers far away compose editorials that sound like distant, some regretful, some approving, most self-assured. They quote from the day and omit the breath between the lines. When a fact is inconvenient, it is fitted with an adjective, alleged necessary unfortunate, and the adjective does the cleaning work. In a ledger, the word vacant is replaced by filled, and the page learns to sit quietly again. But aftermath is not a clerk's task only. It is a neighborhood's. Evening conversations move indoors. The porch, once a theater, becomes a threshold again. Tea cools in cups unemptied because the knock came sooner than expected. In kitchens, rules become heirlooms, the 13 count, the second ring, the habit of not answering every summons delivered by sound. A mother teaches a child that bells can mean prayer fire or permission for people who prefer not to write their intentions down, and that a life is made partly by choosing which meanings to refuse. The child nods serious and practices the arithmetic as if it were scales. Survival is a music lesson you cannot skip. The chapel keeps its own record in the stubborn language of wood. The pews bear the polish of hands. The hymn books remember the pressure of thumbs at certain pages. The rope once firm under palm wears smoother where the sexton held it back. On the first Sunday after the hymn, "Guide me, O thou great Jehovah," returns, slower, heavier, sung in a key that knows what a street sounds like when it decides to teach a city a lesson. No one announces the change. The room chooses it by breath. The bell rings a single time, not a call, a marker, and the sound moves across roofs with the composure of a witness who has learned to testify without shaking. Files accumulate elsewhere away from the river. State archives receive letters folded with careful reluctance. Affidavits written in hands that do not often write. Petitions whose signatures tilt as if the paper were a street on a slight incline. University collections years later will catalog clippings, diaries, photographs, the slow rescue of fragments that thought they were alone. A scholar opens a box and finds absence inside, not blankness. Proof that someone removed something once and adds a note to the finding aid missing leaf. No evidence of replacement. Another scholar reads a typed transcript of a lost letter and writes on the envelope in pencil. Trust with caution. The work of accuracy proceeds with the humility of anyone who has seen paper burn. Time moves as it does, and the river refuses to adopt anyone's nostalgia. Buildings learn new tenants. Children from that year become the sort of elders who speak sparingly, not because they have forgotten, because they learned the difference between telling and spending. They keep a few images polished and tucked into phrases that fit a Sunday step or a porch rail or a funeral line, the second ring. The ash in morning light. The day a bell looked ashamed. Those images pass quietly to pairs of listening hands, and in the passing folklore achieves its serious purpose, not decoration continuity. Decades later, a marker in the ground, an address in a book, a date carved into a modest plaque. A ceremony brief. Officials at microphones, sun on suits. A few sentences written by the committee whose job was to choose language that can survive weather. People gather who are not practiced at gathering with each other. Some read the words, some read the faces, some see a space where a longer sentence ought to be and feel an old draft move through the new gap. Afterwards, the ground holds the marker as ground holds all weight that isn't water. A child asks what it means. A parent answers with a smaller story, the only kind children can carry a long way. The editor's pages don't come back. That is not how pages behave. What returns are copies, summaries, arguments, the honest scaffolding of scholarship, and the stubborn scaffolding of denial. Two constructions built from the same silence. In a reading room, a researcher turns a brittle sheet and hears the dry sound it makes, not unlike ash when swept, not unlike leaves one room over. She writes a line in her notes that begins, "What remains unknown?" And the pencil pauses in midair, a pose no camera to date has perfectly captured. Then she writes the rest dates uncertain, sequence disputed, numbers contested, intentions wrapped in the rhetoric of address. She does not mind uncertainty. She minds when it is used as a broom. Evenings in Wilmington cool. Stairs keep their complaints to themselves. Attics carry trunks, family archives without call numbers, photographs with names written on the back in ink that never expected to be searched by strangers. In one, a man in a dark coat looks off frame, his gaze somewhere prudent, somewhere stubborn, and the paper keeps the look like a loan that will be repaid by attention. Someone brings that picture down for a grandchild and says with the particular pride of survival, he wrote, "The child is too young to know what it costs a city when a sentence is refused its place." But the picture begins the education. Listen, the river again. Night barges slide like commas. The bridge lights make grammar on the water. Gulls edit darkness with quick white strokes before sleep. The city is not the same, and it is entirely itself, that paradox every aftermath must learn to pronounce. What changed, a visitor asks. The obvious, someone says. And the obvious we did not know was obvious, says someone else. Both are right. The rest is years. We circle back because endings are spirals, not lines. The bells. In the telling, the first ring still sounds like possibility, the second like warning, the third like a verdict shaped as a command. The rule survives: 1, finish what you're doing; 2, sit down; 3, come to me. In households that keep that rule, the word me is a plural mother, neighbor, deacon, friend, a community disguised as a pronoun. Children inherit that pronoun, polish it, and one day, on a street where a different kind of summons arrives, they say quietly to themselves, "I do not follow." The sentence has no predicate in the grammar of force. That is the point. As for the records, where do they live now? In safe rooms with controlled air, in boxes too ordinary for the weight they carry. In digitized frames luminous enough to resemble protection. In essays that mind their footnotes. In the careful mouths of people who have decided that telling is a form of planting. And what remains unknown? The conversations no stenographer heard. The sentences the editor rehearsed but did not speak. The names that would change the count if they rose at last from the river of paper and declared themselves present. We admit the unknown without handing it the steering wheel. We let it ride beside us, pointing out the bends. You have heard a file from a history that still breathes. A morning that taught a city how easily bells can be borrowed. A street that learned the mathematics of a crowd. An office reduced to ash that somehow continues to print in the margins of other people's days. If you walk there now, when the light is low and honest, place your palm briefly on the nearest wood, a rail, a pew, a door jamb. You might feel the city's slow exhale. Not forgiveness, not forgetting. Simply the body's right to keep living after language has done it harm. We close gently. The page does not slam. It rests. The rope in the steeple waits for a hand that knows the difference between calling and commanding. The river follows its grammar toward the sea. The photograph returns to its envelope. The marker cools in the evening. And the bell, if it rings at all, offers one clean note that belongs to no faction, just to time. Before we go, leave a trace that says you were with us. Tell us where you're listening from and the exact minute you reached this line. Tell us which details stayed in your ear after the sound faded. You've heard a file from a history that never fully closed. Keep your light. Keep your count. Keep listening and subscribe so the next voice that rises from the archive does not have to climb alone.